You must understand one thing before anything else. No one living in Ridgewell Terrace ever believed the neighborhood itself was dangerous. The houses were new, the streets were quiet, the lawns trim and perfect, the gates modern and secure. On paper, it was exactly the type of place young families dreamed of. Affordable, clean, safe. A model suburban development. But what was written, advertised, and displayed on the brochures was very different from what was buried underneath the foundations of the community. This is the story of how the Homeowner Association of Ridgewell Terrace, once praised as the most efficient HOA in the county, turned into the epicenter of one of the darkest suburban tragedies in recorded history. A tragedy the HOA tried to bury. A tragedy that left 6 families missing. A tragedy so well documented, yet so aggressively denied, that it now exists in a liminal space between rumor and truth. My name doesn't matter in this narrative. What matters is that I was there when the first signs appeared, and I stayed long enough to see what the HOA truly was. This is the testimony I have withheld for years. And this is where it begins. The first thing people noticed when moving into Ridgewell Terrace was the quiet. It was the kind of silence that should have been comforting, but instead felt heavy, as if the air itself was listening. There were no stray dogs barking at night, no teenagers hanging out on curbs, no early morning traffic. The entire neighborhood seemed engineered to suppress sound. The HOA advertised this as premium acoustic zoning. Maybe that was true, or maybe, as we later believed, the silence wasn't engineered by the builders at all. But I'm getting ahead of myself. When we moved in, it was late autumn, the kind of season where mornings feel washed in silver light and nights grow longer faster than anyone expects. The air was cool, the trees only half alive, and every home had identical dark shutters that made the street look like a row of closed eyelids. At first, the HOA seemed normal. Friendly emails, welcoming committee brochures, 2 board members handing out insulated mugs with the Ridgewell Terrace logo, smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes, questions that felt slightly too personal. Do you work from home? What's your daily schedule like? What time do you usually get back from work? Do you sleep early or late? At the time, these felt like awkward attempts at friendliness. Only later did we realize they were the HOA's way of assessing each resident's visibility, their patterns, their routines, their vulnerabilities. Most people ignored the oddness. We were busy unpacking, adjusting, living. But the neighborhood was already studying us. The first rules. Every HOA has rules. That was nothing new. But Ridgewell Terrace had layers of rules. The first layer was the public handbook. Landscaping schedules, trash guidelines, parking restrictions, normal things. The second layer, however, was what caught everyone's attention. The behavioral expectations clause. At first, people thought it was a joke. All residents must maintain harmonious conduct and calm presentation within visible areas of the neighborhood. What did that even mean? Calm presentation? Was the HOA regulating emotional expression? Then there were the stranger ones. No unnecessary wandering. Avoid prolonged standing in community spaces. Refrain from loud personal conversations outdoors. No exterior lights after 11 o'clock p.m. unless justified. Justified to whom? It didn't say. The HOA president at the time, a man named Marcus Hale, brushed off concerns with rehearsed enthusiasm. Oh, it's nothing serious. Just guidelines for keeping the peace. Helps the community remain orderly. You'll see, it's what makes Ridgewell so special. People accepted it. People always accept unusual rules if they're wrapped in the promise of safety. But there was something in Marcus's smile, a little too wide, a little too practiced, that didn't sit right. It took only a week before newcomers noticed an odd pattern. There were no children playing outside, ever. Morning, afternoon, evenings, weekends. Not a single child rode a bike, or kicked a ball, or drew chalk on the sidewalks. But everyone knew Ridgewell had families. You could see children in windows. You saw their backpacks lined up in foyers, through open doors. You saw toys in perfectly arranged living rooms, but you never saw them outside. And when a couple newcomers casually asked one of the older residents why, she simply responded, "Oh, it's against guidelines." Against guidelines for children to play? It made no sense. But the longer we lived there, the more we realized sense didn't matter. The HOA enforced order, not logic. Parents received warnings the first time their children stepped outside with a ball. The second time came with a fee. The third time, something else happened. Some residents claimed they received unmarked envelopes containing photos of their children walking alone. Photos taken from angles too high and too precise for an ordinary camera, as if reminding them not to break the rules again. At the time, these were only whispers, unconfirmed rumors. The HOA insisted they were misunderstandings, but rumors spread in silence, and Ridgewell Terrace had a lot of silence. The first person to go missing was a man named Elliot Granger, a quiet, middle-aged accountant who lived alone at the end of Wisteria Loop. He wasn't social, but he was polite. He waved. He minded his own business. And yet, of all people in Ridgewell Terrace, he was the most terrified of the HOA. He received more violations than anyone else, not because he broke rules, but because they seemed to target him specifically. No porch light after 11 p.m. Grass 2.9 inches instead of 2.5. Parking his car too close to the sidewalk. Packages left outside for too long. Then came the bigger violations, suspicious movements, erratic behavior. What did those even mean? People speculated he was being punished for something, but no one knew what. The night Elliot disappeared, I remember waking up to a deep, resonant hum in the neighborhood. A sound so low it vibrated through the walls. The lights flickered. Dogs from outside the gates barked uncontrollably, even though none lived inside Ridgewell. When the noise stopped, the street fell into unnatural stillness. The next morning, Elliot's car was still in his driveway. His lights were still off. His mailbox hung open. And his front door was slightly ajar, just enough to show the darkness inside. Residents reported it to the HOA first, not the police, because in Ridgewell Terrace, you didn't call the police unless the HOA gave permission. The HOA arrived in less than 10 minutes. 2 board members went inside. 20 minutes later, they came out with calm expressions. "Everything is fine," they said. But Elliot was never seen again. His house was cleaned, sanitized, repainted, and listed for sale within 2 weeks. As if something inside was still watching. After Elliot vanished, the HOA began having late-night meetings in the community hall. No residents were invited. No agendas were shared, but everyone could hear the sounds. Low murmuring, shuffling papers, the scraping of heavy furniture being moved, occasional thuds against the floor. Those living near the hall said the shadows inside didn't match the number of people present. That when board members left, their silhouettes in the windows continued moving for several seconds after they were gone. Others said they saw someone or something walking behind the frosted glass windows, tall, slow, not entirely human in posture. But when residents asked what these meetings were about, the board offered a simple answer: record keeping, procedural updates, nothing to worry about. Except this was when the strange symbols started appearing. At first, only a few homes received them, small chalk marks at the bottom right corner of mailboxes. Residents assumed teenagers were responsible, maybe kids sneaking in from other neighborhoods. But the symbols weren't random. They formed a pattern, a sequence, a ring, a slash, a triangle, a second ring drawn over the first. Some residents tried washing them off. The marks reappeared the next morning. Others covered them with tape. New marks appeared beside the tape. The HOA said it was maintenance markings, but the explanation didn't hold. Why only certain houses? Why only after the secret meetings began? Then came the incident with the Peterson family. They found a symbol carved, not drawn, into their front door. Deep, raw cuts in the wood, not made by hand tools, not made by anything they could identify. When they demanded answers, the HOA president responded with a chilling smile. Some homes here require monitoring. Monitoring 4. But we all felt the truth. The HOA wasn't governing the neighborhood. It was selecting it. Selecting certain homes, certain residents, certain vulnerabilities. That was when people began recording their nights, setting up cameras, watching their windows. That's when the real fear began. The night watchers. It was around this time that residents began reporting shadows in their yards at night. Tall figures, standing perfectly still, facing homes, unmoving for hours. Security cameras captured them, but footage always glitched as they approached. Frames skipped, pixels warped, recordings corrupted. One neighbor described them like this: they weren't people. They were silhouettes, empty, like cutouts placed where no one should be standing. Others said they saw faces, pale, expressionless, watching. The HOA denied everything, of course. They fined residents for installing cameras without board approval. They said shadows were tree distortions. They said glitches were Wi-Fi interference, but people knew, people whispered, people feared, especially when the lights started turning on by themselves at 3:15 a.m., the exact time Elliot disappeared. That was the moment residents began keeping logs, journals, recordings, because we all felt the shift. Something inside Ridgewell Terrace had awakened. Something the HOA controlled, or something the HOA served. And the strangest part, no one had ever seen the original HOA documents, the foundational files, the bylaws before amendments, the architectural plans. The HOA office claimed they were lost in a flood years ago, but a few older residents whispered that the original board wasn't like this, that everything changed after a fire in the community hall decades ago, that the HOA we knew and the entity that walked with them didn't exist until after that night. And if that was true, then Ridgewell Terrace wasn't just organized. It was owned by something none of us understood. The HOA didn't like questions, and when people asked too many, they were visited, usually around midnight, always by 2 board members, holding clipboards, smiling too calmly. "We noticed your concerns," they would say. "We want to reassure you everything is under control." Every visit ended the same way. A final warning letter slid under the door. No signature, no initials, just a symbol. The ring, the slash, the triangle. The same sequence carved onto the Petersons' door. The same marks found on Elliot's mailbox the day before he disappeared. And the same symbols that would soon appear on mine. Because I made the same mistake Elliot did. I started investigating. And Ridgewell Terrace does not tolerate curiosity, especially when curiosity leads you toward the records they tried to erase. The aroma of burned coffee still hung in the air long after Ethan Reed shut the kitchen window. He hadn't slept after what he heard last night. The whispering crowd, the rhythmic steps, the feeling that his home had been circled by dozens of feet that didn't belong on a peaceful suburban street. But morning came. As it always does, sunlight pierced through the blinds in narrow golden stripes, burning into his half-awake eyes. It should have been comforting, but instead it highlighted something else. The shadow standing under the neighbor's tree. Same place as yesterday, same posture, same stillness. Ethan rubbed his eyes. The figure didn't move. He reached for his phone, zoomed in. Grainy image. Not enough detail to see a face, but he could feel something. An unease that crawled under his skin like a cold insect. The figure stepped back into the shade and disappeared. Just vanished. Ethan dropped the phone onto the couch. This neighborhood was wrong, and not just in some vague paranoid way. No, there was a pattern forming. Something orchestrated, something rehearsed. He grabbed his notebook from the countertop. Last night he wrote in shaky handwriting. They were chanting, but no words, just sound. The steps were synced. They stopped when the light turned on. They know when I'm awake. The house hummed softly, like it was holding its breath. Before he could fully gather his thoughts, a sudden buzzing sound rattled across the living room. The doorbell. He froze. Nobody rang doorbells in this neighborhood. Everyone used the HOA app to request meetings or schedule approved visits. Physical contact, spontaneous interaction. It was discouraged. Ethan slowly approached the door and checked the peephole. Someone was standing there. A woman. Tall, pale, wearing the HOA navy blue blazer, hair tightly braided, face too calm for a morning visit. But her eyes did. Ethan unlocked the door, barely, just enough to slide the chain and open it 2 inches. "Can I help you?" She answered with a soft, practiced smile. "Good morning, Mr. Reed. I'm Cynthia Holt, your HOA Wellness Compliance Officer. We noticed your lights were on between 2:13 a.m. and 4 a.m. last night. I'm here to perform a wellness check." Ethan blinked. "My lights?" "Yes." She tilted her head, as if analyzing a specimen. "Our system tracks energy irregularities. Late-night awakenings can indicate distress, and we want all residents to feel safe and regulated." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "You don't need to check anything. I couldn't sleep, that's all." Her smile widened, uncomfortably stretched. "Oh, I didn't say you needed a check. I said I was here to perform one." Ethan noticed something else. She wasn't alone. 2 other HOA officers stood on the sidewalk, hands behind their backs, not facing the house, but facing outward, as if guarding. "Mr. Reed," Cynthia continued, "there have been reports of unusual sounds coming from this block. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Ethan felt a chill. They were outside. If anyone reported sounds, it wasn't from my house. For the first time, Cynthia's smile faded. Her face became still, too still. "You saw something?" Ethan swallowed. Footsteps, whispering, a group of people. They were walking around the houses, including mine. She leaned closer. "Did you recognize any of them?" Ethan hesitated. He almost said no, but then the shadow under the tree flashed in his mind again. A solitary observer, a watcher. "I don't know. It was dark." Cynthia nodded slowly. "That's unfortunate." She tapped something on her tablet. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Reed. Someone from the HOA's Community Observation Team will be in touch." The phrase struck him. Community Observation Team. Cynthia stepped away from the door. "They watch, Mr. Reed. They watch for the sake of the community." And she walked off. No goodbye, no courtesy, just a quiet, drifting step into the morning light. Ethan had barely gotten through making breakfast when a new notification buzzed on his phone. "HOA alert. You have been scheduled for a community interview. Time, 3 p.m. Location, Neighborhood Center, Room 01. "Interview?" he muttered. He wasn't even fully moved in yet. His phone vibrated again. "HOA reminder, participation is mandatory." Ethan slammed the phone down. This was ridiculous. Before he could spiral further, a knock on the back window startled him. He spun around. A little girl stood outside the glass, staring at him with wide brown eyes. She must have been 8, maybe 9. She wore a pink hoodie and clutched a stuffed rabbit. Ethan unlocked the back door. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" She stepped inside without being invited. Ethan felt tingles crawl across his spine. "Who hears me?" She looked toward the living room wall as if she could see through it. Then she pointed. Them. Ethan followed her gaze. It was aimed directly at the wall facing the street. "Sweetheart," he said softly, kneeling. "Who are you talking about?" She hugged the stuffed rabbit tighter. "The listeners." Ethan blinked. "Listeners?" She nodded. "They walk at night. My mom says to close your ears and stay under the blanket, or they'll check your heartbeat." Ethan felt his blood run cold. What do they want? The girl stepped back toward the door. To see who doesn't sleep. To find the houses that wake up. They write names. Names of who? She stared at him for a long moment, then replied with a tremor in her voice. People who won't stay quiet. Before Ethan could say another word, she ran, darting through his yard, across the fence, disappearing behind another line of houses. Ethan leaned against the wall, heart hammering. The listeners, the synchronized footsteps, the chanting sounds, the HOA's interest in his sleep patterns, the shadow under the tree, the community interview. This place wasn't a neighborhood. It was a controlled environment, a monitored habitat, a maze, and the residents weren't living here freely. They were being studied. The interview, 3 p.m. The HOA neighborhood center was colder than last time. Not physically. No, it was the atmosphere. The lights were dimmer, the hallway somehow quieter. Room 01 was at the end of a long corridor, each door labeled with a number and a list of HOA subsidiaries. Compliance Division, Sleep Regulation Unit, Noise Monitoring Department, Community Observation Team, Behavior Adjustment Office. What kind of neighborhood needed these D? Ethan reached room 01 and took a breath before entering. Inside, the room was unsettlingly sterile. White table, 2 chairs, nothing on the walls. Not even a clock. A man in a gray suit was already seated. No name tag, no expression. "Mr. Reed," he said in a voice so flat it sounded automated. "Sit." Ethan reluctantly sat. The man folded his hands. "We're here to discuss last night's disturbances." Ethan crossed his arms. "I've already told Cynthia what I heard." The man's eyes narrowed. "Cynthia Holt? Who is that?" Ethan blinked. "The HOA wellness officer who visited me this morning." The man stared at him for a long time. Then, calmly, "Mr. Reed, there is no one named Cynthia Holt working for this association." Ethan's stomach dropped. "But she came to my house. She had the blazer, the tablet, 2 officers with her." "We don't send officers in pairs," the man said, "and all house visits must be logged in our system. No visits were Ethan felt his throat tighten. He wasn't crazy. He saw her. "I'm not making this up," he said, voice trembling with frustration. "I didn't say you were." The man turned on a small recording device. A red light blinked. "I'm asking what you witnessed." Ethan inhaled, and he told him everything. The synchronized footsteps, the whispering, the crowd moving around the houses, the shadow observer, the disappearing figure, the little girl, the listeners. Didn't react. Not once. He simply waited until Ethan finished. Then he asked, "Do you believe the residents here are dangerous?" Ethan looked him in the eyes. Yes. The man pressed a button on his tablet. Interview concluded. 2 large men opened the door. Both wore the HOA security insignia. Both expressionless. "Escort Mr. Reed home." Ethan stood. "What? Why? I can walk myself." The suited man offered a thin, cold smile. "For your safety." The sun was already dipping toward the horizon, turning the sky orange. Shadows stretched across the pavement like long, dark fingers. The 2 security guards walked on either side of Ethan, a silent escort. As they passed by houses, Ethan noticed subtle changes. Windows with dark reflective film. Front yards with identical gravel patterns. The same potted plants repeated at every walkway. Residents standing inside, motionless behind curtains, staring out, watching, listening. When they reached Ethan's street, the taller guard leaned close and whispered, "Tonight, stay inside." Ethan stiffened. Why? The guard didn't answer. He simply tapped his chest twice, a small gesture, subtle but urgent. Then they both walked away. Ethan hurried into his house, locked the door, and shut the blinds. Night was coming. And whatever lived in this neighborhood, whatever walked these streets with synchronized steps, whatever listened at night, it was coming again. But this time, they already knew his name. At 1:50 a.m., Ethan woke up before any sound, before any steps, before any whispering. A pressure filled his ears, like the moment before a storm explodes. He slowly approached the window and peeked through the blinds. Nothing. Silent street. Dim streetlights. Still trees. Then, a tap. Another. A rhythmic pattern. Tap, 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 tap. The same cadence he heard the night before. He held his breath. A figure walked into view. Then a second. Then 4 more. Then dozens. All wearing identical hooded gray garments. All barefoot. All moving with perfect synchronization. They formed a ring around the house across the street. The old Johnson place. Ethan watched, trembling. The figures placed their For what? A heartbeat? A breath? A whisper? Suddenly, every figure snapped their head toward Ethan's window, as if detecting the movement of his blinds. Dozens of eyes, staring directly at him. Ethan stumbled back from the window, gasping silently. Through the blind gap, he saw them, all of them, turning, facing his house. Then, slowly, silently, they began walking toward him. One step, in perfect sync. Then another. Their steps shook the ground with eerie uniformity. Ethan whispered, "Oh God." He backed away. Another step, and another. They reached his driveway. They stopped at his wall, and they began to listen. Ethan pressed both hands over his mouth. He didn't dare breathe. Not a sound, not a movement. Because now he understood what the little girl meant. They check your heartbeat. They find the houses that wake up. They write names. Outside, he could hear them, hands pressed against his walls. And in that unholy, death-like silence, someone whispered from the other side of the wall, slowly, clearly, as if speaking directly into his skull, "Ethan Reed." By the time dawn broke over Ridgewell Terrace, the night felt like it had never ended. The sky was a pale, washed-out gray, the kind of color you see in old photographs where faces look drained of life. The air felt thick, not cold exactly, but dense, as if the atmosphere had absorbed the weight of what had happened hours earlier. And though the sun had technically risen, the neighborhood didn't brighten. Ridgewell Terrace never truly brightened. It only shifted from one shade of dimness to another. That morning, a mist clung to the streets like a thin, white film. It wasn't fog. Fog moves, breathes, changes. This mist stayed still, hanging low around the lawns and mailboxes as if it was choosing not to leave. I stepped outside, not because I wanted to, but because staying inside felt worse. After what the listeners did to my wall, the hours of whispering, the way my name echoed long after the sound had ended, the house felt contaminated. My front door creaked with a sound I had never heard before, a slow, painful groan, as if the hinges were resisting my attempt to leave. And the moment I stepped outside, I could swear the house behind me exhaled, a long, low sigh, the same way a body does when letting go of tension. As I walked down the steps, I noticed something immediately. Every single house on the street had their shutters closed. Not half closed, not angled. Completely sealed shut. Like eyes shut tight after witnessing something unbearable. Only one exception stood out: the Hale residence. The HOA president's home had its shutters wide open. All of them. Every window, every blind, every curtain pulled back deliberately, as if to say, "We do not fear the night. We control it." At the end of the cul-de-sac stood a white utility van parked at the curb, unmarked, unregistered, unfamiliar. Except, it wasn't unfamiliar. We had seen it before. Multiple times. Parked at different homes. Always early morning. Always after a night when something strange happened. Its windows were tinted darker than state regulations allowed. Its tires left no tracks. And the engine, even when running, made almost no sound. A van like that didn't belong to any maintenance crew. Today, its back doors were partially open, just enough to show a glimpse of what was inside. Large black cases, thick cables, a metal contraption that looked like a frame for restraining something the size of a person. And beside the van, two HOA board members stood talking to each other. They weren't whispering, they were speaking normally, but I couldn't hear a word. The mist seemed to swallow their voices. Their faces looked wrong somehow. Not deformed, not inhuman. Their expressions were unnaturally flat, almost mask-like, as if they were trying to mimic human expressions rather than naturally having them. Both wore gloves, black ones, not because of the cold, because they didn't want fingerprints anywhere. When they saw me, they didn't smile, they didn't wave. They simply nodded in unison, a slow, deliberate movement, but gesture of acknowledgement or warning. I nodded back, not because I wanted to, but because something in their synchronized stillness compelled me to return the motion. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. They weren't the ones watching me. Something inside the van was. A faint shift, a subtle movement, the feeling of eyes, not human, tracking me from the darkness inside. I didn't stay to confirm it. As I walked further down Wisteria Loop, trying to breathe in the cold air, the neighborhood struck me as dead. No engine sounds, no sprinklers, no morning joggers, no dogs being walked, no breakfast smells wafting from open windows. Ridgewell Terrace was a still life painting. Then I saw her, Mrs. Ashford, the elderly woman who lived 3 houses down, the one who used to water her flowers every morning at exactly 7:15. She stood on her porch holding her watering can. But she wasn't watering. She wasn't moving. She wasn't blinking. Her eyes were fixed on something across the street, something only she could see. Her watering can slowly tilted, the water dripping silently onto her shoes. When I called out, gently, "Mrs. Ashford, are you all right?" she didn't react. Not even a twitch. Only her lips moved, very faintly, forming a single word repeated over and over. "Listen, listen, listen." Her voice wasn't audible, but her mouth made the shape perfectly. The listeners had gotten to her too. When she finally noticed me, it wasn't gradual. It was abrupt, as if someone snapped her mind back into place. She inhaled sharply, nearly dropping the watering can. Her eyes widened with terror, not surprise. "Go inside," she whispered. "Go before they see you talking to me." "Who?" "Inside," she hissed with a panic so raw it cut through the silence like a blade. "They take interest in anyone who speaks too openly. They hear everything." I stepped back. Her hands trembled violently as she reached up and shut her own mouth with both palms, literally holding her lips together, terrified that a single misplaced word might carry through the morning air. I watched as she backed into her house and closed the door gently, not slamming it, not locking it loudly, gently, as if sudden noise might attract something. A new symbol. By the time I reached my own mailbox, the mist had begun retreating. though very unwillingly, as if leaving the street was painful for it. And that's when I saw it. A symbol marked on the side of my mailbox. But it wasn't chalk like before. It was burned into the metal. Deep, black, melted edges. Impossible for any person to create quietly at night. This symbol wasn't the usual sequence. Not the ring, the slash, or the triangle. This one was new. A vertical line carved through a circle, with branching marks around it like radiating cracks. I touched it. The metal was warm, still warm, as if whatever made the mark had done it moments ago. My stomach tightened. This wasn't vandalism. This wasn't a warning from the HOA. This was a marking, labeling me, classifying me, possibly claiming me. Behind me, a voice spoke. "You shouldn't touch that." I turned. It was a man about my age, someone I had barely seen before. Tall, unshaven, nervous eyes darting left and right. "You're Ethan, right?" he whispered. "How do you know my name?" "Because they said it last night," he replied quietly. I heard them through my walls, too. This was the first time a resident had ever openly admitted hearing the listeners. His name turned out to be Caleb Mercer, resident of Lot 44. He moved closer, lowering his voice even more. "That symbol, it means they noticed you. Not the HOA. Them, the ones that come before the board arrives." I swallowed. "What does it mean specifically?" "It means," he breathed shakily, "that you survived contact. And they don't like that." I nearly stepped back, but Caleb grabbed my arm firmly. "Whatever you do, Ethan, don't let the HOA know you heard anything. They have ways of—" A sudden mechanical buzz sliced through the air. Caleb froze mid-sentence. A drone, a small black surveillance drone, hovered above the street, silent until it turned its lens toward us. The moment it locked onto Caleb, he jerked his hand away from me and stepped back. I have to go." He retreated to his house without another word. The drone followed him until he disappeared behind his door. Only then did the drone turn toward me. It hovered for a long, deliberate moment, recording, calculating, observing. Then it flew off toward the HOA office. When I returned to my doorstep, an envelope waited for me, white, unmarked, placed precisely in the center of my doormat. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No letterhead, no signature, just a message in plain black text. "Resident, your recent behavior indicates heightened suspicion and non-compliance. You are being monitored for your safety and the safety of the community. Refrain from further irregular activities." At the bottom was the same symbol burned into my mailbox. But something else was written in smaller print below it, so faint it almost blended into the paper. "Some sounds are not meant for you." My breath hitched. They knew. They knew what I heard. They knew what happened last night. I reread the note a dozen times. Each time, I noticed something new. The shape of the letters, the spacing, the subtle indentation of the words. Then, under the right angle of light, I saw a second layer of text, written in a different ink, nearly invisible. "You were chosen." For what? I didn't want to know. But the answer was coming whether I wanted it or not. The tap on the glass. That evening, when the mist returned, heavier than before, Ridgewell Terrace began to shift again. Not with noise, not with movement, with presence. A pressure in the air, a thickness that made breathing shallow, a sensation of being watched from every direction. Around 11 p.m., I turned off all my lights. Not because I was tired, but because I was afraid they might see me awake. Then came the tap, a single tap, on the living room window. Not frantic, not aggressive, slow, intentional. I froze where I stood. Another tap, then another. But it wasn't knuckles, it wasn't fingertips. It sounded like something harder, sharper, almost like bone. I stepped closer, heart pounding violently against my ribs. A shadow stood outside, tall, thin, motionless. Then a second shadow joined it. Then a third. all facing my window, all silent, their heads tilted slightly, as if listening for something behind the glass. They weren't trying to break in. They weren't trying to scare me. They were trying to hear me move. Any sound, any breath, any whisper. The listeners were back. This time, not whispering, not calling my name, listening. Listening for what? I didn't move, didn't breathe. And then, something else tapped on the back window. A fourth one, maybe a fifth. They were surrounding the house, encircling it, waiting. And in that moment, I finally understood what Caleb Mercer meant. You survived contact, and they don't like that. They were here to correct that. They were here because I had heard them. I stepped back slowly, pulse thundering in my throat. Then the tapping stopped. The shadows withdrew. Not walking, not fading, just dissolving into the mist. As they vanished, something slid under my front door. A piece of paper. I waited until the shadows disappeared before I crawling forward to reach it. It was a note, written in the same faint, unnatural hand as before. But this one wasn't from the HOA. It was from them. We hear what you fear. If you speak to any survivor of Ridgewell Terrace, and there aren't many left, they will tell you the same thing. Everything truly changed on the night of returns. People think the disappearances, the symbols, the whispers in the walls, the strange movement in the mist, those were the real horrors. But those were warnings. Warnings the neighborhood ignored, because acknowledging them would mean confronting a truth none of us were willing to face. But what came that night? That was the moment Ridgewell Terrace stopped being a suburb and became an open wound. A place where the dead weren't the only ones returning. The living returned too, but they didn't come back the same. That evening began quietly, almost deceptively so. After the visit from the listeners at my windows the night before, the house felt different. Not merely haunted, not merely watched. It felt inhabited, like something had come in through the cracks and refused to leave. The air was heavier than usual, thick with a metallic taste that coated the back of my tongue. The moment dusk fell, the house grew colder, not gradually, but instantly, like someone had opened a door to a winter cellar. The shadows lengthened unnaturally. Corners of rooms grew darker, as if absorbing light instead of losing it. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, even the sound of my own breathing felt muffled, swallowed by a silence that was almost physical. But I didn't dare leave. Not after what happened at the mailbox. Not after the HOA's compliance notice. Not after the listeners circled my house like wolves that night. So I stayed inside, waiting, listening. And then, right as the sun dipped, something happened that broke the day in half. Every house in the neighborhood turned off its lights at the exact same time. Not staggered, not gradually, instantly. Like a coordinated blackout. Except mine. My lights stayed on, which was impossible because I had turned them off. I stood in my living room, staring at my lamps glowing brightly. The bulbs hummed with a low frequency, vibrating slightly, almost whining. Then they flickered, once, and every window in the house went pitch black. Not dark from the outside, but blackened. As if something was pressed up against the glass from outside. Something massive, blocking all light. I approached the nearest window slowly, my breath fogging as the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. When I reached it, I placed my palm lightly against the glass. It wasn't cold. It was warm, like a living thing was breathing through the window. I pulled my hand back immediately. Then I heard it. A knock. Soft. Rhythmic. 3 taps. Pause. 3 more. Then a voice. So faint, it felt like it was being whispered directly inside my skull. Ethan. I stumbled backward. It wasn't the listener's voice. This was different. This voice was human and familiar. A voice I hadn't heard in over a month. a voice belonging to a man who had already been declared missing. Marcus Feld, my former neighbor, the man whose house was cleared by the HOA van, the man who vanished the same night the mist rolled in thicker than ever, the man whose disappearance the HOA claimed was voluntary relocation. His voice outside my window was impossible, yet unmistakable. I forced myself to look. Slowly, cautiously, I leaned toward the glass. At first I saw only blackness, a void pressed against the pane. Then, like a face emerging from deep water, someone appeared, pale, gaunt, eyes sunken into shadow. Marcus, or what was left of him. His skin looked like it had been drained of color. His clothes were the same ones he'd been wearing the last day anyone saw him. But his body moved strangely. He pressed his palm against the window, smearing the glass with a thin trail of moisture. His mouth hung slightly open, and when he spoke again, his jaw barely moved. "Ethan, open the door." His breath formed no condensation. His eyes didn't blink. His body didn't sway or shiver. He was standing too still, far too still. Then I noticed something horrifying. Marcus wasn't supporting himself. There was a shape behind him, a darker shadow, stretching tall and broad, holding him upright by the shoulders. Long, thin fingers wrapped around him like hooks. Marcus wasn't knocking. The thing behind him was puppeting him like a marionette. I staggered away from the window, choking on a wave of terror. The knocking grew louder. Not human knuckles, something harder. The taps became bangs. The bangs became pounding. The pounding became shaking. Then multiple windows began rattling. More fists, more voices, voices of residents who had been missing for weeks. Dead neighbors, vanished families, all speaking in the same slow, unnatural unison, all begging for the same thing. "Open the door! Let us in! Come outside, Ethan!" The house trembled. Then the lights went out. My heart stopped. The silence that followed felt like a hand closing around my throat. For a long moment, nothing moved. Nothing tapped. Nothing whispered. I was alone in the pitch black. Then a sound came from behind me. Not from the window, not from the walls, from inside the house. A slow, deliberate footstep. Then another. My eyes adjusted, just barely, enough to see a shape at the end of the hallway, a silhouette standing with its head tilted slightly, listening to my breathing. I held my breath. The shape stepped closer. Its joints cracked softly. Its movements were jerky, marionette-like. As it approached the faint sliver of moonlight leaking under the front door, I finally saw its outline clearly. It was Marcus, inside my house, still controlled by the thing behind him. I took one silent step back. The thing took one step forward. Then another voice joined his. Female, soft, trembling. "Ethan, please help us." I recognized it immediately. Mrs. Dorn's daughter, gone since July. Another voluntary relocation. Her figure limped out of the dining room doorway, half her face obscured in pitch black, the other half pale and slack, like skin stretched over bone. Behind her, another figure emerged. Then another. My house was filling with the returned, and each one whispered my name like a prayer to something dark. I turned and bolted toward the back of the house, but the shadows moved faster. They cut off escape routes, herding me like prey toward the center of the living room. Then all the returned spoke in one voice, the same voice with the same pitch, the same tone, the same unnatural calm. "He marked you. You belong to him now." My knees buckled. "Who?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. The shadows around the returned thickened, twisting, merging, rising behind them like a growing storm. In the swirling darkness, faint, ember-like eyes opened, not burning, observing, ancient. patient, hungry. The first listener. The entity the HOA existed to veil, the one the listener served, the one who lived beneath the neighborhood long before houses were built, the one who had called my name that night. Its voice filled the room, without sound, without vibration, without air. A voice felt inside the bones. Return to me. The pressure in the room slammed into my chest. My ears rang. My vision blurred. My knees hit the floor. The return swayed, their bodies jerking like puppets caught in an unsea. The entity's shadow leaned forward, and the entire house shook with a deep, resonant boom. Not from the entity, from outside. A horn. A long, blaring, mechanical horn. The HOA van. The front door burst open as two HOA board members stormed in, gloved hands, expressionless faces, eyes empty of emotion. They didn't look at me. They looked at it, at the first listener. The taller board member pulled a device from his belt, something like a handheld siren with a metal core. He pressed a button. A piercing, ultrasonic wail filled the house. The returned screamed, not in pain, but in distortion, like their bodies were rejecting the frequency. They dropped to their knees, convulsing violently. The shadows recoiled, twisting like smoke caught in a wind tunnel. The first listener hissed, its form rippling as if dissolving under a chemical burn. The HOA member shouted, "Ethan, floor, now!" I hit the ground, not out of obedience, but because the pressure from the sound forced me down. The shadows shattered. The returned bodies went slack. The windows burst outward in a cloud of mist, and the entity slipped away. Not gone, just withdrawn. The device clicked off. Silence swallowed the house. The board members stared at me. No sympathy, no relief, only cold finality. One stepped forward, holding a small metal cylinder. "We warned you," he said flatly. I backed away. "What is that?" "A suppression dose. Standard procedure for marked individuals." "I'm not taking anything from you." He sighed. A mechanical, practiced sigh. "You no longer have a choice." He lunged. I dodged, knocking over a lamp. The floor shook as something massive slammed against the outside of the house. The entity hadn't left. It was circling, watching, waiting. The board member grabbed my shoulder, but before he could inject me, I hit the ground, not out of obedience, but because the pressure from the sound forced me down. The shadows shattered, the returned bodies went slack. The windows burst outward in a cloud of mist, and the entity slipped away. Not gone, just withdrawn. The device clicked off. Silence swallowed the house. The board members stared at me. No sympathy, no relief, only cold finality. One stepped forward, holding a small metal cylinder. "We warned you," he said flatly. I backed away. "What is that?" "A suppression dose. Standard procedure for marked individuals." "I'm not taking anything from you." He sighed, a mechanical, practiced sigh. "You no longer have a choice." He lunged. I dodged, knocking over a lamp. The floor shook as something massive slammed against the outside of the house. The entity hadn't left. It was circling, watching, waiting. The board member grabbed my shoulder, but before he could inject me, the board members stared at me. No sympathy, no relief, only cold finality. One stepped forward, holding a small metal cylinder. "We warned you," he said flatly. I backed away. "What is that?" "A suppression dose, standard procedure for marked individuals." "I'm not taking anything from you." He sighed, a mechanical, practiced sigh. "You no longer have a choice." He lunged. I dodged, knocking over a lamp. The floor shook as something massive slammed against the outside of the house. The entity hadn't left. It was circling, watching, waiting. The board member grabbed my shoulder, but before he could inject me, the front window exploded inward. A long, shadowed limb shot into the house, grabbing one of the HOA members by the torso and yanking him through the shattered glass. The man didn't scream. The shadow carried him into the mist like a prize. The second board member turned ghostly pale. "Oh God," he whispered, "it's..." The house was empty now. But outside the mist moved with intention. Shakes drifted within it, some tall, some broken, some familiar. They returned, all standing, all waiting. And the entity, its shadow stretched across the street like a living tide. Not attacking, not whispering, just watching. Because the night of returns wasn't an attack. It was an announcement, a declaration, a reclamation. And as the mist parted slightly, revealing a clearing around my front door, I saw a message burned into the ground. A perfect circle, a vertical line, radiating cracks. The same symbol from my mailbox, except this time, beneath it was a single word scorched into the grass: chosen. The mist closed in again, swallowing the shadows, hiding the entity. The night wasn't over. It had only paused. And whatever waited beyond that mist, whatever purpose the first listener had for me, it wasn't finished. I should warn you before we continue. Every official investigator who reviewed what happened during these 48 hours ultimately wrote the same sentence in their closing report. This part of the case cannot be explained. Most investigators were too proud to admit something supernatural. Others were too rational to believe what the residents described. And a few simply quit the force after seeing Ethan Reed's home the morning after the incident. But the truth is this: Part 5 marks the moment when the neighborhood officially crossed from horror into impossibility. The kind of impossibility that doesn't ask for your belief. It simply happens and leaves you to deal with the consequences. And this is how it began. The footage we found from Ethan's living room camera is still one of the most disturbing videos I've ever watched. And I've reviewed crime tapes, disaster reels, and evidence from some of the darkest cases in this state. The video begins with the same thing reported by all the neighbors: breathing. Not Ethan's, not heavy human breathing, but the sound of something large, dense, and old exhaling through the walls. Like the house itself had lungs. In the video, Ethan is pacing, whispering to himself, his hands trembling violently. He keeps glancing at the wall where he had heard his own name whispered the night before. And then the wall bulges, just slightly, barely noticeable, but enough. It pushes inward, stretching, like it's soft, like something behind it is pressing through. Ethan freezes. He whispers, "No, no, not again, please, not again." The wall stops. The bulge retracts. Silence. Then, bang! A single blow from inside the wall. Sharp, direct, deliberate. Ethan jumps back, trips over the coffee table, and falls. His breathing becomes ragged. He crawls backward until his shoulders hit the opposite wall. And for 10 seconds, nothing moves. Then, bang! The curtains pull inward. Dust rises off the floor. Ethan's hair lifts slightly. Then, the house exhales. Lights flicker. The coffee table slides 2 inches. Ethan screams. He tries the front door. It doesn't budge. He tries the back door, locked from the inside. He grabs a chair and attempts to smash the side window. The glass flexes like rubber. Not unbreakable, not reinforced, just wrong. Later, forensic teams confirmed all the windows were normal when they arrived at dawn. But that night, they didn't behave like anything built by human hands. HOA camera footage, 3:26 a.m. Unbeknownst to Ethan, the HOA's central surveillance system was still functioning. The storm had disabled most neighborhood cameras, but the ones installed inside HOA-approved smart homes, including Ethan's, were powered by internal batteries. Meaning, the board still watched everything. In the archived footage, we see the moment the emergency HOA meeting is called. Its 6 board members enter the clubhouse basement. Their faces are pale. One of them, Mr. Keller, keeps muttering, "It wasn't supposed to choose another. It wasn't supposed to happen again." On the far wall, a live feed of Ethan's home is projected. The house looks normal from the outside, calm, still, but the audio channel is active. All they hear is the breathing. The board does not panic. They do not call the police. They do not send help. Instead, they perform a ritual, a quiet one. Methodical, practiced. This is the moment, investigators later said, when the HOA became complicit, not just negligent, but actively participating in something dangerous. One board member opens the black binder from the archives, the one Avery found earlier during her search. Inside are 12 pages of rules crossed out in red ink, a list of names, dates of disappearances, and an entry titled, "The House Claims Again." That title alone is enough to freeze you. But the board reads it like an instruction manual. They knew what would happen. They had prepared for this moment long before Ethan ever moved in. And that tells us everything we need to know about the HOA. They were caretakers of something ancient, not protectors of the neighborhood. They followed a pattern, not logic. And when the pattern began again, they obeyed it, no matter the cost. Inside the Reed home, 3:41 a.m. The camera catches Ethan on his knees, holding his ears as the walls begin whispering again. This time, not his name, something else. We enhanced the audio several times. Experts listened, language specialists analyzed waveforms, sound engineers removed static. Every enhanced version produced the same phrase: "Get out of my house." A command, direct, authoritative. But the house wasn't asking Ethan to leave. Because he couldn't, and because the house wasn't speaking to him. It was speaking to something else. Avery's decision, 3:49 a.m. Avery cannot sleep. She sits by her bedroom window, staring at Ethan's house as dim flashes appear behind the curtains, like a candle flickering, or something moving between the walls. She notices something else too. The street is empty, but it feels crowded. The night air seems thick, like dozens of eyes are watching from behind the hedges, the porches, the shadows between houses. Avery feels the same sense of being observed that she felt near the HOA clubhouse. Deep, cold, suffocating. But she makes a mistake, the kind that only people with good hearts make. She decides to go help Ethan. She puts on a hoodie, grabs her phone, and books it across the street. The moment she steps on his driveway, she hears it. A faint vibration beneath the concrete, like something shifting underground. She freezes. The door swings open a crack. Not by Ethan, not by wind. Just opens slowly. Avery whispers, "Ethan?" No answer, but she enters anyway. Inside the Reed living room, 3:51 a.m. The house is cold, too cold. Her breath fogs. The lights are off, but the space glows faintly with a sickly green hue, like the walls themselves are emitting it. She sees Ethan in the corner, curled into a ball, shaking uncontrollably. She runs to him. He flinches so violently it looks like he's having a seizure. "Avery," he stammers. "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't have come. What's happening? What's wrong with your house?" Ethan doesn't answer, because the wall behind him answers for him. A deep crack forms, long, jagged, running from ceiling to floor. Drywall dust drifts down like ashes. Then the house breathes again, a long inhale. Avery feels the air pull at her clothes, her hair dragging toward the wall crack, like static pressure is building. "Ethan, we need to get out," she says, pulling his arm. He looks at her with... Bolts slide. Plaster dust erupts from the walls. The house is vibrating, soft at first, then violently, like it's trying to shake itself apart. Avery screams over the noise. What does it want? Ethan's voice is barely audible. It wants what the HOA promised it. The house goes silent. Everything stops. And then, from the cracked wall, a hand reaches out. Not human, not skeletal. Something in between. Long fingers, translucent skin stretched thin over dark veins. Fingertips stained black, like they've touched soil for centuries. The hand feels along the wall, as if searching for something. Then it grabs the baseboard and begins pulling the rest of the body through. A skull-like head emerges, jaw dangling, empty eye sockets glowing faintly. Avery screams. Ethan collapses. The house breathes with excitement. For a moment, it seems certain the entity will fully enter the room, but instead, it points directly at Avery. Like it's deciding, choosing. The house groans, a deep, angry, heavy groan. Then the entity withdraws back into the crack, slowly, reluctantly, as if unsatisfied. The crack seals shut. Silence, Ethan whispers. It wanted me, but now it saw you. Avery steps back, horrified. What does that mean? Ethan shakes his head violently. I don't know. It was only supposed to take one. The living room light flickers once. Then the house speaks again, but this time, it whispers Avery's name. HOA emergency decision, 4:18 a.m. The board members realize the entity has changed its target. They fear the consequences. They argue, shouting over each other. They decide to override the system, to seal the house, to contain both Ethan and Avery inside, to isolate the cycle until the entity chooses. They activate an emergency lockdown. Every smart home system in the Reed house locks simultaneously. Windows, doors, garage, back patio, even the vents shift. The house becomes a sealed chamber, a waiting mouth. Inside the Reed house, 4:22 a.m. The lockdown triggers. Avery's phone buzzes with a message. HOA alert. Stay where you are. Do not exit the property. For your safety. She stares at the message in disbelief. For our safety? We're trapped in here. Ethan backs away from the walls, hands over his head. We have to stay calm. It won't come out again until it decides. Decides what? Who to take. Avery stands silent for a long moment. Then she makes a decision, one that defines everything that happens in parts 6 and 7. She decides she won't be a victim. She walks to Thing, and she begins hitting it. Hard, with fists, with a lamp, with anything she can find. Come out, she screams. Come out and face me. The house replies, not with breathing, not with whispers, with a sound like wood splintering, like a rib breaking. The floorboards beneath Avery's feet ripple. The walls pulse. The ceiling lowers just an inch. The house isn't angry. It's waking up. Ethan yells at her, voice cracking. Stop! You don't understand. It feeds on defiance. But she keeps hitting, keeps screaming, keeps provoking the very thing everyone else was too terrified to confront. And the house responds in full. The event, 4:29 a.m., the moment every investigator agrees on. Something impossible occurred. The living room walls expanded outward, then snapped back. The temperature dropped 20 degrees instantly. Every light bulb burst simultaneously. The wallpaper peeled itself off like shedding skin. And then every voice the house had ever mimicked began speaking at once. Ethan's voice, Avery's mother's voice, the previous owners, the 3 missing residents from last year, and deeper voices, older ones, layered beneath them, dozens of them, all whispering the same words. I see you. Avery staggers back, clutching her ears. Ethan collapses, sobbing. The entity is choosing between them. The walls bulge again. The crack splits open. A face emerges, hollow, ancient, furious. It stares at Ethan, then at Avery, then a deafening crack. The floor beneath them splits. A massive chasm opens, long and jagged. The air pulls downward, like a gravitational force. Avery falls forward. Ethan grabs her wrist at the last second. The house screams, a long, piercing metallic shriek. And then everything stops. The walls fall still. The crack closes. The air settles. Avery and Ethan are left trembling on the floor, alive. But the entity is not gone, just waiting, just watching, just choosing. HOA reaction, 4:40 a.m. The board is silent, terrified. One member whispers words that later became famous in the investigation. It didn't choose. It wants both. The others stare at the monitor in paralyzed horror. For the first time in years, they realize something devastating. They've lost control of the cycle. What happens next will be catastrophic. For Ethan, for Avery, for the neighborhood, for the entire entity they swore to manage. They begin evacuation procedures. But it's too late. The house has already made its decision. The final moments in the footage show Avery and Ethan back to back in the dark living room, the entire house around them creaking like a massive beast waking from centuries of sleep. Avery whispers, "What does it want now?" Ethan shakes violently. It wants what the HOA promised it, but it's bigger now, stronger, hungry. Avery swallows hard. What does that mean? Ethan looks at her with dead, defeated eyes. It means it won't stop at one resident this time. The house breathes slowly, deeply, then whispers, "All of you, fade to black."